Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. You can catch Ray's Talk Show, the podcast that won't be silenced, anywhere you can download a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the list goes on. And check us out on social media, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, or on Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. I have no business recording this podcast, frankly. I'm wearily trying to wind down after essentially a 4-month election campaign sprint. I've managed through various entities that I'm associated with, manage voter registration, voter ID, voter persuasion, and ultimately get out the vote efforts in Philadelphia and in selected communities around the country. And I'm quite honestly exhausted. Muy cansado, papá. But I felt the need to share a few thoughts with my friends that are similarly exhausted around the country, relate how we're feeling, and at least how I'm feeling, and just some very initial thoughts about what last night's midterm election results mean and what next. And I think I'm going to theme, at least for the rest of the calendar year, a lot of the conversations you're going to hear on Ray's Talk Show around this concept of what next, because that's certainly on our mind. What's not next is us just worrying about who's going to be the Democratic nominee, just to give you in 2020, just to give you very easy to obsess about, but so much more needs to be done. But first, just some give you a thought about what the last 3-4 days of my life have been like. The Rollercoaster episode of Ray's Talk Show. You know, going into the weekend, sort of typically for the organizer that's out there talking to voters and engaging people throughout the country in the work that I'm able to do, you know, feeling pretty good. You know, you sort of get this tipping point where you're doing electoral stuff in our communities where you kind of feel like it's a long slog going into summer, going into the fall. People aren't really feeling it. They're not paying attention as much as you'd like. They don't have as much information generally as much to like. No, that's our job, right? To provide them that. But nevertheless, and then you get this tipping point, you know, anywhere from a week to 10 days before an election where people just sort of wake up. And so you kind of get this re-energized sense of possibilities. And as polls and momentum and attention went to, you know, sort of our you know, really exciting elections, real sexy elections, Gillum in Florida, Abrams in Georgia, O'Rourke in Texas, and others, you know, you just sort of get, you know, your mind just started dreaming the big dreams, you know. And I had felt, and I had said on the episode leading up to the midterms, about 40 seats in the House and 50-50 in the Senate. And I was feeling the 50-50 was even probably a little optimistic as we were rounding into the final days. But nevertheless, and then the election day happened. Record turnout all over the country. Early vote, of course, was gangbusters as well. And just kind of cautiously optimistic as the polls closed. And I guess ultimately we shouldn't be shocked. But I must say, the euphoria of the House was blunted by the gut punches of those losses. And I think the gut punch felt so damning and so gut-wrenching because, first of all, they were all so goddamn close. I think Gillum was, you know, I don't know, it still might be like less than 1%. You know, it's a fraction of a percent. Beto's similar, even Abrams is fairly similar, 1-2%, and it'll probably get closer as more ballots get counted. And that feeling of just so close, you know, and not wanting my organizing friends in those places to feel like their work was wasted, because of course it wasn't, but you just kind of, you have those moments when you feel that way. And then just the reality of what that means, you know, having Ted Cruz in our lives 6 more years. You know, there's people that could have got Medicaid with Gillum in the governor's mansion in Tallahassee. There's certainly, you know, labor rights that could have been strengthened or at least monitored. There's certainly recovery transition efforts for people coming from Puerto Rico that could have been strengthened. You know, our quality of life in Florida suffered by that loss. No question. And Beto, you know, I watched the and for my Facebook family, the post that I shared with sort of summing up this conversation in my Facebook post, was of Beto's, basically his concession speech last night, and it was so fantastic, and even had a little Chase Utley in it, and I watched it this afternoon, and I teared up. And I teared up because of all the things I just shared. It all just kind of bubbled to the surface. Just what appears to be just this near miss of just this historical moment. And I had to let it out. And after I let it out, and Beto being so inspiring as he continues to be, it made me harken back to what the civil rights pioneers that we've built upon here have went through, and it taking decades for just these incremental movements of civil rights in this country. And similarly throughout Puerto Rico, Latin America, and throughout the world, civil rights activists who did all this collective work so we could complain about results in an election that we were able to participate in this country, in this democracy, and just thinking I need to stop feeling sorry for myself, and really putting into focus what particularly the Gillum and O'Rourke and Abrams elections meant, which is essentially, if you think about it in political terms, if you look at the sort of political dynamics of those states, they essentially threw 70-yard passes. They did an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady or a Cam Newton or somebody, and they threw a big bomb. I mean, real impressive, beautiful flight, trajectory. And, we made a great catch, and we just got tackled at the 2-yard line. So it doesn't take away from the fact that all those elections, all those movements, all that activism from the campaigns, from the candidates, and from our activist friends around the country was freaking fantastic and historic, and moved the ball towards closer, much closer, in an accelerated fashion to the kind of democracy and the kind of equitable society that we're fighting for in one cycle in a pretty incredible way. So I wiped away the tears and resolved myself to, we just got to get back to work. This was never going to be the be all and end all. As you can see from today's headlines, our democracy, our rule of law is under attack more than ever before. Our freedom of the press under attack more than ever before. And we just have to continue. And so I had to let it out. We've gone through that roller coaster, and we're going to continue to. We're going to be counting votes in California and Arizona for a few weeks. And that shades how we should feel about those elections. So, just thinking about kind of where we go from here, I think sort of big picture, thinking about sort of national electoral, democratic politics, we have to take full advantage of this opportunity we have by the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives. And so there's a lot to that, right? We have to balance the accountability to the president with really implementing an agenda of what a Democratic Party America looks like and leadership looks like. And, we really have already missed an opportunity, right? Because we did not, whether it's the DNC or the congressional slate of candidates, never really laid out sort of a unified agenda, very similar to the contract with America that Newt Gingrich laid out very successfully in the 90s, which led to him becoming Speaker of the House. And because we haven't done that, there still is this sense that there's a lot pending in the air. So we have to resolve that, and we have to let people know what we're going to do and do it, and do it in a way that sort of balances the subpoenas and, and the nefarious stuff we have to check with this guy, but with showing them that there's an alternative, including some of the issues that are stickier, like immigration and other issues. So we have to have an agenda. And the other part, which I think is going to be fascinating with the House, is that we're going through a transition. The Democratic establishment is still there for the most part, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, and we need to allow this new generation of leaders, which very strategically have gone in on filling up our congressional delegation, primarily women of color. We need to support them and really sort of create that momentum to not only challenge the old guard, which is part of this, but ultimately showing the United States, showing Americans, and showing the Democratic Party that it's time to allow this the true energy and the true leadership of this party now to take their rightful place. So a lot of excitement, a lot of emerging leaders that are going to have a platform. But I will say that, the other thing that made me cry, I think, is that there's a whole lot of Americans, and essentially half of white America voting for this racist white supremacist agenda. And it's really disconcerting. And, there's a fair amount of particularly, there's a notable amount of people of color, particularly notable amount of Latinos that are also supporting this agenda. And so what that means on a personal level, who do I trust? Who do we trust? How do you have these conversations? How do you engage with people knowing there's a certain amount of people around you that are, sort of nice for the most part, but are harboring these, supporting these political agenda, even though they're nice and they don't think they're racist, and they get real mad when you talk about it and sort of intimate that they're complicit in this issue because they're quote unquote not a racist. Well, they're going to have to be held accountable. And so that's disconcerting. So that's on the congressional side. That's sort of the big picture stuff. I think from a activist perspective, we need to push to have that agenda. It needs to be coherent. It needs to come from what we heard on the ground this cycle. Obviously, healthcare bubbled to the surface, but there's other issues, gentrification in our community, the opioid crisis, which is, we have to delve into, which has a lot of layers to it. The issue related to supporting working families and working women around the issues around childcare, which Stacie Abrams has brought to the forefront, which needs to continue. The other issues related to student loans that have lost notoriety post Bernie Sanders presidential run. The gun control debate and community safety, which our young people are leading. What's really our agenda here, and not sort of this corporate, safe, generic agenda that too oftentimes the Democratic Party in various forms pushes on us. And so the activist class has to hold Democratic leadership accountable and help open the doors to the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes and the Ayanna Presleys as they take on these new roles. And then we have to also look to the states. We had a lot of great victories in the states, governor's races. Beto, even though he lost a tight one, his coattails led to a lot of great advances, not only in the Texas congressional delegation, but in the Texas House, the Texas Senate Democrats. So, sort of blocking supermajorities and, making even in a minority status, their input in Texas politics much more substantive and impactful because of the numbers. And we have to push a lot of these new governors, the Michelle Lujan Grishams in New Mexico, Steve Sisolak in Nevada, Gavin Newsom in California, and others, to, put up or shut up. Let's be bold. Let's try to do Medicare for all. Let's try to impart more labor protections. Let's try to raise the minimum wage in our state. Let's try to find resources for working people and working women for childcare, so they're not working for healthcare basically. And so, we need to push them now that we've dragged them to the finish line in power now to do the right thing and move that agenda. I think the last thing is we need to share our story and share our perspective. It's incredible. It's infuriating that throughout this whole process, where we were so excited about Gillum and Beto and Stacie, and hardly anybody talked about the Latinos running for governor in Southwest states, one of which won yesterday. Michelle Lujan Grisham, first Latina Democratic governor in this country, the only governor of color that won yesterday. And what she can do as the governor of the state of New Mexico with a significant Hispanic and minority population, particularly the Native American community. Nevada, our folks, the untold story of the night last night, partially because it was so late and votes are still being counted, but nevertheless, with four, frankly, not very high profile and just sort of meh candidates from the governor's race in Nevada on the Democratic side to Senate candidate Rosen and the two swing congressional seats, Latinos pulled them over the finish line again and again and again last night. And we're not telling that story enough. We need to elevate those stories and elevate those leaders and elevate the agenda they want to see move forward in state and federal policy. And so we have to continue to tell those stories, and we have to continue to mobilize and continue to share our perspective and force the national debate to talk about our issues and focus on our perspectives. It just can't be the old frames. Oh, the Latinos vote enough. They didn't vote enough. Are they going to vote? What's it going to take for them to vote? It needs sustained investment. It needs sustained diligence, and it takes sustained a refusal to allow our voice to be silenced. Look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She forced her perspective, her platform into the debate. And she didn't ask anybody permission. She didn't need machines. She didn't go by, sort of this old, tired mentality. And I go back to what Puerto Ricans did post-Hurricane Maria. We didn't ask permission. We just started taking leadership to support our island. So with that, it has been a continual roller coaster. I just want to thank all of my friends around the country. There's too many to name on this podcast, coast to coast. Our ladies in New Jersey who we collaborated with, our friends in Florida, which they're doing God's work out there, my Texas friends, which I was able to reconnect with during this cycle. Coast to coast, local, state, federal, just so many friends doing some amazing work out there. And I ask you to take care of yourselves, spend some time with family, try to rest up because we have to really be at our best here as we defend our democracy. So I want to thank all of you out there, whether you're activists or you were candidates, win or lose. My homie Leo Perales ran a very valiant fight for the state Senate race out Washington State and many others. You don't have to win to make history. You don't have to win an election to make a difference. You don't have to win a popular vote to change lives, as we've seen from as the roller coaster is zipped up and down and coming on decline, de-escalating from last night's sugar high of election results. Thank you all so much for joining Ray's Talk Show. I'm going to be talking to some people, potentially in a very exotic location over the next few days, and I'm going to ask this question: what next? And I want you all to think about that. Email me, contact me. My email is podcastraise@gmail.com, podcastraise@gmail.com. Let's continue the conversation. What next? What is next for you? What are you focused on? What do you think the Democratic Party should be focused on? What do you think progressives should be focused on? The Latino community, the civil rights community, people that believe in our democracy. I mean, at this point, it's a pretty wide net of people that are very concerned about the future of this country, and what is triggering, unfortunately, the hearts and minds of too many of our friends and neighbors who believe, on some level, that their problem, their main preoccupation, their main just frankly, the demonization, putting down, putting in our place, however you want to put it, people that look like me and came from exotic places like my family. That's really sad. It's really sad, and it's as a parent fearful because my kids look like me and they're from the same background, and I don't want to deal with that bullshit. So let's continue the conversation. What next? I'll be capturing hopefully some interviews and some conversations over the next few days, and we'll continue these conversations here on Ray's Talk Show, the podcast that won't be silenced. Let us know what you think. Write us a review on, super appreciate your write a review on whatever platform you download and subscribe to podcasts, particularly iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube. The list goes on and on. And let's continue the conversations on social media, on Twitter @Ray's Podcast, on Instagram @Ray's Latino Talk. And again, let's continue to talk about this question: what next? Thank you all for accompanying me on this roller coaster, this election cycle. And thank you for all the work you're doing out there to empower people and not give up on this country, not give up on this grand experiment. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.